matter what specific kind of job you do, if you don't learn how to negotiate and deal effectively with people, you're hardly going to be able to make your points across and to get what needs to be done, what needs to be done for you to be effective at work. One thing that I want to be clear is people's conception of negotiation is far more restricted and narrow than it should be. This is one of the things that I also teach to business managers. If they think about negotiation only focusing on this, they're starting on the wrong foot. Because what they're doing is they're thinking about one of the possible outcomes of negotiation, whereas negotiation is a process, it's an interpersonal process. And it tends to be far more pervasive than we generally think, and it tends to start much earlier than we generally think. So this is just a few of the possible outcomes that negotiation processes can affect. But as a matter of fact, what we do as we negotiate is we tend to deal with things that are much broader in scope than just these things. And we tend to do this much earlier than we rationalize it. So what's the idea of this course? As I said, I start from the premise that I am a privileged individual who can study negotiation as opposed to negotiating all the time. And I would like to use the wealth of information and experience that is here because you guys instead are on the field. You need to get things done on a faster, time scale than I have to. And you have a lot of varied experiences dealing with all the various agents that are critical for those who work in humanitarian logistics. So I'm not going to try and challenge you on the details of how it's, you should negotiate as you carry out your job. What I'm going to try to do is ask you a different thing. There are two things that in your daily work life you generally cannot do. The first is taking a distance, thinking, reflecting about the way in which you work. All of us are negotiators in the sense that we negotiate all the time, but we get limited opportunities to think about the ways in which we negotiate. And one of the things that hopefully we will learn in these 2 days is that what we learn and what we think is the best way to negotiate typically is only what we find to be most convenient for us, given the way in which we feel and think about negotiation. That is, almost all of us tend to be persuaded that we are effective negotiators because this has been working kind of well, if I think about my past. But what I'm going to try to show today is, look, many times we think we're doing well just because we don't take the time to reflect on what other alternatives we would have had if we would have conceived of the negotiation more broadly and more deeply. Once you do this extra step, then you recognize that we tend to be easy with ourselves. We tend to put the bar very low. What we tend to do is we tend to prefer to negotiate in a way that makes it easy, comfortable for us, as opposed to negotiating in the way that's going to be more effective. One of the things that I would like to do with you is ask you to, take a distance from the way that you generally negotiate, go up in the moon where I reside for my job and look down and think about the way in which you negotiate with a more distant eye. Because the reason for doing this is that you can then explore opportunities that typically would not be visible if you don't take this distance. So let me get to the definition of what negotiation is so that I also tell you where the scope condition of what we're going to talk about in these 2 days. Negotiation is an interdependent exchange process. It is an exchange process where I give something and I expect something in return. And these might mean material resources, tangible assets of some kind, but also immaterial resources. A smile can be part of this exchange process. It is. A word can be part of this exchange process. This exchange process is interdependent. That is, it's in a context of strategic interdependence. Action calls reactions between two or more parties, each with its own interests and perspective. Negotiations are useful only if the parties involved in the process have at least partly conflicting interests. If Alfonso and I are both thirsty and there's only one glass of water, then my interest is against his, and vice versa. Here's a context where negotiation might play a role. But if I'm not thirsty and he is, there is no need for a negotiation. Our interests are not in conflict. Or if we both are thirsty, but there's a lot of water for everyone, then there's no need for a negotiation. Our interests are not in conflict. So negotiation kicks in when two parties or more have conflicting interests. What is good for one is at least partly bad for the other person, and vice versa.